Fantastic literature cannot be treated as a single unit, because it is a composite resting on widely divergent bases. I really agree that Yog-Sothoth is a basically immature conception, and unfitted for really serious literature. The fact is, I have never approached serious literature as yet, but I consider the use of actual folk myths as even more childish than the use of new artificial myths, since in employing the former, one is forced to retain many blatant puerilities and contradictions of experience, which could be subtilized or smoothed over if the supernaturalism were modeled to order for the given case. The only permanently artistic use of Yog-Sothothery, I think, is in symbolic or associative fantasy of the frankly poetic type, in which fixed dream patterns of the natural organism are given an embodiment and crystallization. The reasonable permanence of this phase of poetic fantasy as a possible art form, whether or not favored by current fashion, seems to me a highly strong probability. It will, however, demand ineffable adroitness, the vision of a Blackwood joined to the touch of a Delamere, and is probably beyond my utmost powers of achievement. I hope to see material of this sort in time, though I hardly expect to produce anything even remotely approaching it myself. I am too saturated in the empty gestures and pseudo-moods of an archaic and vanished world to have any successful traffic with symbols of an expanded dream reality. But there is another phase of cosmic fantasy, which may or may not include frank Yog-Sothothery, whose foundations appear to me as better grounded than these of ordinary oneiroscopy. Personal limitation regarding the sense of outsideness. I refer to aesthetic crystallization of that burning and inexcusable feeling of mixed wonder and oppression which the sensitive imagination experiences upon scaling itself and its restrictions against the vast and provocative abyss of the unknown. This has always been the chief emotion in my psychology, and whilst it obviously figures less in the psychology of the majority, it is clearly a well-defined and permanent factor from which very few sensitive persons are wholly free. Here we have a natural and biological phenomenon so untouched and untouchable by intellectual dissolution that it is difficult to envisage in its total depth as a factor in the most serious art. Reason as we may, we cannot destroy a normal perception of the highly limited and fragmentary nature of our visible world of perception and experience as scaled against the outside abyss of unthinkable galaxies and unplumbed dimensions. An abyss wherein our solar system is the merest dot by the same local principle that makes a sand grain a dot as compared with the whole planet Earth. No matter what relativistic system we may use in conceiving the cosmos as a whole, and this perception cannot fail to act as potently upon the natural physical instinct of pure curiosity, an instinct just as basic and primitive and as impossible of destruction by any philosophy whatsoever as the parallel instincts of hunger, sex, ego expansion, and fear. At any rate, the lore of the unknown abyss remains as potent as ever under any conceivable intellectual, aesthetic, or social order, and will crop out as a forbidden thing even in societies where the external ideal of altruistic collectivism reigns. In types where this urge cannot be gratified by actual research in pure science, or by the actual physical exploration of unknown parts of the earth, it is inevitable that a symbolic aesthetic outlet will be demanded. You can't dodge it. The condition must exist under all phases cosmic interpretation, as long as a sense-chained race of inquirers on a microscopic earth dot are faced by the black, unfathomable gulf of the outside, with its forever unexplorable orbs, and its virtually certain sprinkling of utterly unknown life forms. A great part of religion is merely a childish and diluted pseudo-gratification of this perpetual gnawing towards the ultimate illimitable void. Superadded to this simple curiosity is the galling sense of intolerable restraint, which all sensitive people, except self-blinded earth-gazers like little Augie Derleth, feel as they survey their natural limitations in time and space as scaled against the freedoms and expansions and comprehensions and adventurous expectancies which the mind can formulate as abstract conceptions. Only a perfect clod can fail to discern these irritant feelings in the greater part of mankind, feelings so potent and imperious that, if denied symbolic outlets in aesthetics or religious fakery, they produce actual hallucinations of the supernatural and drive half-responsible minds to concoction of the most absurd hoaxes and the perpetuation of the most absurd specific myth types. Don't let little Augie sidetrack you. The general revolt of the sensitive mind against the tyranny of corporeal enclosure, restricted sense equipment, and the laws of force, space, and causation is a far keener and bitterer and better founded one than any of the silly revolts of long-haired poseurs against isolated and specific instances of cosmic inevitability. But of course, it does not take the form of personal petulance, because there is no convenient scapegoat to saddle the impersonal ill upon. Rather, it does crop out as a pervasive sadness and unplaceable impatience, manifested in a love of strange dreams and an amusing eagerness to be gulled by the quack cosmic pretensions of the various religious circuses. Well, in our day, the quack circuses are wearing pretty thin despite the premature senilities of fat Chester bullocks and affected wasteland Shanith dwellers and the nostalgic and unmotivated over-beliefs of elderly and childhood-crippled physicists. The time has come when the normal revolt against time, space, and matter must assume a form not overtly incompatible with what is known of reality, when it must be gratified by images forming supplements rather than contradictions of the visible and mensurable universe. And what, if not a form of non-supernatural cosmic art, is to pacify this sense of revolt, as well as gratify the cognate in sense of curiosity? Dent isk, as they say in your decadent cosmopolis. No, young Belloc, you can't rule out a phase of human feeling and expression which springs from instincts wholly basic and physical. Cosmic fantasy of some sort is as assured of possible permanence, its status subject to caprices of fashion, as is the literature of struggle and eroticism. But of course, as I have said before, its later and less irresponsible forms will doubtless differ vastly from most of the weird literature we have had so far. Like the lighter forms of dream fantasy and yog-sothothery, it will require a delicate and precise technique, so that a crude old-timer like myself would never be likely to excel in it. Nevertheless, if I live much longer, I may try my hand at something of the sort, for it is really closer to my serious psychology than anything else on or off the Earth. In The Color Out of Space, I began to get near it, though Dunwich and the Whisperer represents a relapse. In using up the ideas in my commonplace book, I shall doubtless perpetrate a great deal more childish hokum, gratifying to me only through personal association with the past. Yet the time may come when I shall at least try something approximately serious. There is of course no need of becoming serious, so long as thinly veiled childishness retains power to gratify me. But I am assuming that my real senility has not so far advanced as to check, just yet, that gradual mental maturing perceptible in me since 1919 or 1920, the period of Galpinian activation, and apparently somewhat accelerated, perhaps through Providence reorientation, since 1927. I am still a primitive and retarded type, as measured by good intellectual standards, but not quite so pathetic a case of belated infantility as I was in 1920 or 21 or 22, when I spewed forth such insufferable maundering as the tree, hypnos, the moonbog, the hound, etc., etc., though a fat middle-aged clod who ought to have known better a decade before, or even in 1925 when, during the Clinton Street period, I allowed myself to sign such mawkish drivel as The Horror at a Red Hook and, worse yet, He. The only decent things I wrote in those days were sheer luck shots, Arthur German, Eric Sun, and a few others, and yet I had a better time, in some ways, than I have now, for my very infantility, repulsive as it was in a middle-aged man, allowed me to retain a subjective reality of something of that sense of adventurous expectancy, which is now only a wistful aesthetic memory. I shall never find another Dunsanian city of wonder as utterly unreal and linked with incredible cloud mysteries as the exotic and unexplored labyrinth of seaborne towers that was the dim, half-fabulous Manhattan of 1922. Least of all could I find such a Dunsanian place in any Manhattan of any later date. I grant then the virtues of infantility so long as they are valid, even though such phenomena must, of necessity, appear absurd to the mental adult. What is hollow and insincere is the parade of infantility in art, and its feigning by the adult artist after its real essence has passed away. Dead childhood rattling its own bones in a mocking and hellish danse macabre.